Well, hello everyone, and thanks for joining us for this exciting series we're calling Performance Week. We'll be spending 3 hours, 1 hour each day, today, tomorrow, and the next, to talk about performance analysis and monitoring using two of our most popular performance tools, Performance Navigator and Robot Monitor. Joining me today are Randy Watson, known the world over as one of the top experts on performance analysis and capacity planning on the IBM Power Server. Hi, Randy. How you doing today?
I'm doing good.
Super. Thanks for joining us. Also joining us today is Alex Lazaro. He's a senior technical consultant here with Fortra, and he's got experience as a power system architect and administrator. Alex, are you with us?
Yes, sir, I'm here. Thank you for letting me join.
We're really pleased to have you on board. I'll let everybody know that both of these gentlemen are recent common presenters, and just super to have them with us to talk about performance analysis, capacity planning, and reporting and so forth. And so here's the deal. We built this webinar to be as much of a training session as possible in the time that we've been given. So a total of 3 hours over the 3 days. So you'll no doubt have questions and possibly even some follow-up for us. So please send us your questions using the Q&A feature, and we'll follow up with you after the fact. We'd suggest if you have either or both of these products installed to follow along with our examples best you can. We're going to have a lot of live demo during these sessions. Some of the material will take some soak time and practice, or possibly even some one-on-one time with someone from our professional services and education department. You'll have an opportunity to request assistance for that at the end of each day. Alex, why don't you take us through our week?
Oh, sure. So this is a week. On the first day, we will have we will talk about collecting and monitoring. That's collecting and monitoring the performance data and the basic setup and difference between Performance Navigator and Robot Monitor. The second day, we will be talking about operations and reporting. So how you can use our tools for diagnosis and report generation. And on day 3, we'll be discussing more advanced tips like how you can monitor SQL or JDBC jobs, virtualization, cloud, and capacity planning. So I think that's it for the agenda.
All right,
And
and what are we doing today?
oh, yeah, sorry. Today, we're going to be talking about the basics of performance analysis, and we will be having a brief introduction on both of the Product Monitor and Performance Navigator. Performance Navigator, we will be discussing about the role of the collection services, and Robot Monitor, well, about all these really cool built-in and custom monitors that we have. We will discussing about monitoring the frame, what we mean by monitoring the frame, and also about the benefits of using both products together.
Awesome. Okay, so let's jump into basic performance analysis. And Randy and I are going to kind of team up on this. So first of all, how do you go about doing performance analysis now? All right, what do you do when you get that phone call when performance is suffering and response time is bad, maybe batch jobs are taking longer than normal? Well, typically we use the standard work active job, work system status, work system activity commands that have been around for a long time. You might resort to the built-in performance tools, go perform, and work through that. Randy will talk a little bit about that. You might be well enough along in your education to use Navigator for I or PDI, the Performance Data Investigator. Or as Randy likes to say, just simply stop answering the phone and your problems will go away. Of course, normally that's not an option. So the question you need to ask yourself is, where are the bottlenecks? Are they hardware bottlenecks? Are you hamstrung by lack of CPU? Is your disk I/O maybe not adequate? Are there memory issues? And how is that distributed across your workload? So if some of those bottlenecks do exist, how do you address those bottlenecks? And if not, well, how do you know for sure you don't have some kind of a hardware bottleneck? And then there's the application issue. All right, how do you identify where there could be an application issue? And that's one of the things that Robot Monitor allows you to do, is wrap monitoring around your application. Now, if it's not your application, well, now where do you go? All right, Randy?
Yeah, exactly. So as he mentioned, commands that we're probably all familiar with. One thing to note about each of those commands, obviously, is, when you start them, the numbers actually are averaged, right? So depending on whether you're looking for averages or whether you're trying to look at, a particular problem, the F10 will restart the stats, right? So again, depending on how long you let that command run, you need to pay attention to that. So if it's running for 6 hours, it's an average of 6 hours. So just pay attention to some of those things. But obviously, it's a quick way to at least get a quick snapshot. And as he mentioned, the Go Perform, that is that menu comes with the performance tools. That used to be an extra charge feature. It is no longer. It is free with the operating system. So if you don't have it for some reason, you can always go to the IBM ESS entitled software supports website, download performance tools, and you can get that menu. Most people, when they do that, it's a green screen report. So you have collection services. And this is how you manage it, right? There's some menus that help you manage collection services, and there was how it's collected and how long and so forth. But you can also get analysis, right? So you can basically get green screen reports, one member at a time. So if you came in today and your user was complaining about it yesterday, you could actually go into Go Perform and get some green screen reports to look at that. And as he mentioned, there's also Navigator for I, or PDI, but it's sort of, other than a nice GUI and obviously some more options in it, it's basically the same thing. You're going to be looking at one member at a time. Basically, you can just pick the member, and when we say a member, we're talking about a given day, or at least part of a day. There is an option to collect history. By default, it's off, so you got to turn it on. There are some historical data that you can get on some of the graphs, and so that's sort of what people do today. And again, it's mostly when the phone rings, right? You're doing prob determination. It really is not about managing the whole system on an ongoing basis. It's more like a prob determination type function.
Yeah, not so much proactive monitoring.
Correct.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump into Robot Monitor and Performance Navigator, just introductory discussions, because you may not have been exposed to these before, or if you have, maybe you haven't really dove in deep on them. So first of all, Robot Monitor and Performance Navigator are part of our robot product line. The robot product line is modular. We've got different categories of solutions: job scheduling, message management, HA and backup, performance monitoring, capacity and performance analysis, and report management. So we're going to pick out these two modules because they are the most popular modules in our performance category. You notice they are in separate categories. Robot Monitor is under Performance Monitoring, and Performance Navigator is under Capacity and Performance Analysis, because it's more of a forensic tool. Robot Monitor is more of a real-time tool. Robot Monitor has been part of our robot product line for more than 10 years now, and we've done a lot of work on this tool. You'll notice here in the graphic, you'll see a dashboard. So we're going to talk a little bit about dashboards today. We like to talk about Robot Monitor as not just a performance monitoring tool, but also as an application monitoring tool, because you can wrap various monitoring types around your workloads. For instance, BRMS, Mimics, Robot HA. It also incorporates VIOS. So if VIOS or AIX partitions are part of your environment, we can include that in on the monitoring. The data is recorded for the most part every 30 seconds with some adjustments possible. And those 30-second samples are collected, compared against a threshold. We can send out exception notification if you exceed a threshold, and you can also look at the data historically. So you can do some more forensic analysis as time goes on, and it has drill down capability so you can see what jobs are running at any point in time. One additional performance factor that you may not consider as actually being related to performance is disk storage. All right, so as your disk fills up, your backups take longer and longer to execute. So there are disk analysis and collection features built into the product to help you do that. If your management requires some kind of management reporting, maybe on a weekly basis or monthly basis or what have you, we can also generate reports from the GUI. We can do that automatically. We can even email those out. So a lot of features and functionality built into this, and one of the things we like to point out too is that it's highly, highly customizable. Pretty much everything in the GUI is customizable. As far as the architecture of Robot Monitor, it looks like this. You would install a Robot Monitor on all your Power System partitions. You must have at least one IBMI partition, and one of those IBMI partitions is identified as being the central Robot Monitor host system. All the other partitions will be reporting into that central Robot Monitor partition. And it's there where we do the comparison to your threshold settings. It's there where we can do the external notification. It's also there where you'll connect the graphical interface to that central IBMI partition. So all the data is stored in a DB2 database. The notification can happen two ways. We can either put a message into a message queue, and then any message monitoring technology like Robot Console can pick that up and send it out, or we can interface directly to what's called Robot Alert. So if you already have Robot Alert in your environment, you can drop Robot Monitor in and send out notification that way. One of the beautiful features of this technology is its ability to do customized dashboards. You can have as many dashboards as you want, and we'll demonstrate that today. And you can even set up what's called a dashboard slideshow. So for whoever is viewing the GUI, you can have 3 or 4 or 5 dashboards cycling through with the relevant information. And keep in mind that all the color coding that you see on the screen is customizable by you. So if you want your staff to see something, if you exceed a threshold, you want to change it to orange or red, pretty easy to do. Alex, you want to take us through the drill down?
Yes, sure. So basically here is how you can make this work. You can receive an alert, in this case via email, sent by route alert, saying that your JDBC CPU usage is high. So you go to the road monitor and you see that the jobs are spiking indeed. And there, with just a double click on the spike, you get to see the highest CPU CPU used in jobs. So in this case, we see a job that's QC DSAO init. So you can see that that's a JDBC job, and we can right click on it and we can go to work with job, and we can even see the SQL statement that was causing all of this pain to the CPU usage. So you can see that the SQL is still running. You can see where it's been running from, and you can actually take a look at the call stack, the files open. So it's a really cool tool to monitor the system and see what's going on right now. And like Chuck said, you can actually also generate reports with this tool. They can be automated. You can take them out to a printer, to a CSV. You can even send an email with these reports, and you can get a number of several reports on a number of different systems and put them all together on an email and get them to be sent on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on the basis that you requested them to be sent.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So let's chat a little bit about Performance Navigator. Like Performance Monitor, the intent here is to help you not only manage a given LPAR, but certainly manage the entire system you're running on. In most cases today, I'm going to say a vast majority of people have more than one LPAR, even if it's like BIOS and one IBM I LPAR or one AIX LPAR or whatever. So, but a lot of people have multiple LPARs. So again, it's not only about monitoring a given operating system, but certainly the hardware that is running on, right? So therefore, just like as in Performance Monitor, we support IBM I, AIX, BIOS, and Linux. And one of the things about Power VM and same thing with Monitor, you have to be Power VM aware because we are monitoring the hardware, and obviously Power VM is essential in helping you configure the hardware in terms of which LPAR gets accessed and when and priorities and all that kind of stuff. So you have to understand things like virtual shared pools, like capped and uncapped, and all the virtualization settings. So it's important to help you understand that stuff when you're looking at the data, right? As Chuck mentioned, one of the things about Performance Navigator, we do keep lots of history, and we do that, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail later, but a lot of this has to do with trending, right? Oftentimes your manager is going to say, well, am I growing or not growing, right? So it had to do with trending analysis, right? So in order to do that, you have to have averages, because you can't trend on spikes or peaks, even though you certainly can, but you're really trying to figure out, is my workload on this machine growing or not, right? So that's the trending aspect of it. This same data obviously can be used for problem determination. So the great thing about history, when you have a problem, for example, a batch job used to run an hour, now it runs 2 hours, it would be really nice to understand why it ran an hour before versus why it runs 2 hours now, right? So having that history would sort of help understand what changed, right? And again, talking about the infrastructure, we're talking about the model number and, CPW numbers and RPERF numbers and performance numbers. And not only that, but certainly besides the CPU, we're talking about memory and disk and how it's configured. And there's a lot of tuning parameters or knobs you can turn to improve or understand how those are affecting it, right? Just like as in Monitor, Performance Navigator does collect a high-level library and object sizes. We do that sort of to help you figure out my distance growing and say to help you answer the why question, right? The way we keep this data, the way we keep years of data is with a process we call data reduction. And this is where and this is running on your host, and this is where all the averages are being done. And we'll talk about what those are in a second here. But unlike Robot Monitor, Performance Navigator, because we do a lot of capacity planning services and problem determination services, the host code is free. So and we're talking about you can install this on every machine, whether you have a key or not. It does not require a key. And we actually give you a couple of free things. We give you a daily health check, a CPU graph, and a disk graph. The reason we do this is to make sure that you're running, right? Make sure you're up to date and the collection services is going okay, right? So every once in a while, when you have a problem, it would be really nice to have a lot of history, or the more history, the better, than it would be to say, okay, I don't have any history, let's just start collecting today. So this is sort of the logic behind we give the free host code away.
Randy, I've heard you say many times, no data, no analysis.
Exactly. Thanks, Chuck. So, what do people use Performance Navigator now that we have all this stuff? But most of the time, as it's used for management reporting. And like Robot Monitor, a lot of this stuff can be automated. So the production of management style reporting, right? So, and you will show that a few examples. And of course, we can do that by the frame, by the partition, by the whole enterprise, as a matter of fact, right? Most of the management reporting is HTML based. So, you can say this to a web server or, a shared drive or whatever for management to look like, right? In order to do understand who's consuming your resources, we do track every job and every user in terms of the resources consumption historically, which really helps understand, who's consuming the most CPU, who's consuming the most disk, who's consuming the most IO, who's doing the most faulting, those kind of things, right? So having that history of that resource consumption by every job and user certainly helps you understand, your application, right? And as we saw in Robot Monitor, ODBC these days is usually one of the biggest resource consumption, and it's important to look at what is known as a concurrent user, because ODBC, like several other jobs, system task is a system task, meaning that QZDS and init job that Alex was talking about, that one job could actually service multiple people over the course of a day, right? Could service hundreds, as a matter of fact. So that job itself has something called a current user. So it's important that you peel the onion back a little bit, so to speak, when you're talking about these server jobs. And of course, hardware analysis is certainly important. So a great example of this, oftentimes I'll see a customer looking at his CPU utilization, and they're just looking at a utilization graph and say, hey, it dropped from 60% to 30%, so I'm okay. Well, the reason it dropped is because they changed the configuration. In other words, somebody other than them changed the configuration, which means they actually gave it more resources, therefore the utilization dropped. So, it probably is okay, but, it makes the graph look great, but actually you're using more resources than you were before, right? So you have to understand.
You're paying double licenses, for instance.
Exactly. So it's important. Yeah, it's great to be 30%, but do I really need to be 30%, right? And there's detailed things like job weight buckets. I'm sure most people are familiar with some other tools like Job Watcher or iDoctor and a lot of times they're focusing on weight buckets. You really don't have to run those. Collection Services actually keeps those weight buckets for us, and we can actually visualize that. We'll show you that later. And as I mentioned, we do a lot of capacity planning. We're sort of the only tool that I'm aware of that actually goes into the hardware deep dive capacity planning. And we're talking about not only CPU, but we're talking about memory and disk. So if you think about server consolidation and about whether you're going to go on, if you're going to do this on-prem or if you're going to go to the cloud. So a great example is if you're going to upgrade on the cloud or on-prem, the answer is going to be different than if you went to the cloud. And that's because of the way it's priced. So you really have to understand not only the performance, but you have to understand the financial ramifications of being, for example, on-prem or in the cloud, because it does matter and it does change the configuration. And of course, there's things like PEP1 and PEP2 analysis. There's things like virtual shared pools, which again, these are all part of Power VM and the way IBM charges things. So those can also, I'm going to say, complicate the capacity planning issue, but we've been doing it for so long, we've certainly have to stay on top of these programs that IBM announces from time to time. And like I said, a lot of times people think CPU when they're thinking capacity planning, but disk and memory can be a particularly important aspect of that. The best example is when you're doing on-prem, memory is sort of, let's just buy as much as we can, right? When you're going to the cloud, that is the most expensive part of the cloud is memory. So it's sort of like the reverse question. How little can we get by with, if the finances are an issue, right? So on-prem, buy as much as we can. On the cloud, have little. So that's a good example of the difference between the two things. So just like Performance Monitor, if you think about, Robot Monitor, Performance Navigator, how it's architected, right? So for IBM I, our main input is collection services. So we have a job, the data reduction job, and when we analyze that data, we put it in a library called QMPG data. So MPG lib is where all of the historical data resides, right? So most of our interface is with MPG library. So we're for all that data stored on each partition. We do have an interface to QPFR data. That's our current day interface, and we'll talk about that. For AIX and Linux, we are doing Inmon. So Inmon is part of AIX and BIOS, so that is shipped with it. For Linux, it is open source. Part of our installation packages, we do ship, we've already pre-compiled all the Inmons from that open source, so you don't have to go through that. So that is the equivalent, if you will, of the data being used. So with those two things, obviously the Windows GUI is going to visualize all of that data. So for IBM I, we use an ODBC connection because the data is stored on each of the partitions. And we're using the ACS ODBC driver, which 95+% of people have all the time. For AIX and Linux in BIOS, it is a flat file. So Inmon is a flat file. And so you either have to, most people either can manually transfer it to the same PC that Navigator is running on, but a lot of people, to automate this, they just map a drive. So we have automated scripts in each of those operating systems to transfer the files to this map drive, and therefore you always have instant access to the data, right? So that's visualizing the data one at a time or one metric at a time. But of course, there's a lot of metrics. So and to help things, and like I said, most of the time it's management reporting. It's under that category called Power Analytics, and this is an example of a daily health check. And so you can see it's color coded, it's HTML, and we can tell you what the averages are and what the peaks are, and more importantly, what the status is, right? So we have thresholds, we do have defaults, and you can obviously modify those, but you can easily see whether a metric is approaching a guideline or above a guideline or you're below a guideline. So that's just a brief example of one of the output sources. There's many outputs of HTML type and format.
Randy, would you say that's a differentiator between Navigator and PDI, or between Performance Navigator and the IBM product, so to speak, is the guidelines?
Yes, that exactly. I mean, plus looking at it usually like one at a time, and putting it in a format that's more management friendly, as you can see here, right? And again, we're hardware focused here. And as you mentioned on the very first graph, when the phone rings, most people are going to blame the hardware or the operating system as the problem, right? Not the application. In our experience, and Chuck can jump in here as well, but probably 70% of the time it's an application problem, not a hardware problem. But it winds up being our job as the administrators to prove to the application team it's not the hardware, it is actually an application issue, right?
Good point. Good point.
So we need to, make that distinction here. So as I mentioned before, remember the data reduction job, and of course, in order to do trending, you need to have averages. And by default, we do two shifts, and these are not people shifts; these are workload shifts. So it's the traditional 8 to 5, 8 to 5:30, and this is when people are awake. So for example, how busy is your CPU from 8 to 5? And again, because we're trending and we're doing averages, it really gives you an insight as to what day is your busiest day. Do you have a month end that's busy, or do you have weekends that are busy? Do you have backups on Sundays and Saturdays? It's really neat to see these averages in the trending, right? Second shift is the batch cycle. So it's actually from 5:30 all the way to 8 o'clock the next morning. So again, first shift, second shift. Most people focus on first shift because that's usually when the phone's going to ring, but you certainly can do both. Now, because we have this history, you have to be able to drill up and down. So when we talk about drilling up or down, we're talking about we take the same data and we could average it for every day. So you could say yesterday the average between 8 and 5:30 was 60% busy. But now you can look at it for the week, and you can look at it for the month. And by default, by the way, we exclude Saturdays and Sundays because that workload is typically different. Often, most companies, that workload, they're doing backups or maintenance and stuff like this on the weekends, right? I mean, the best example of the opposite of that is retail stores, right? Mm-hmm. All retail stores are probably open on Saturday, and most of them open on Sunday these days. So in that case, when they're doing trending, they probably want to trend, all 7 days instead of Monday through Friday, which is a good example, right?
And Randy, sorry, I think that one of the biggest differences between this product and IBM products is the capacity to drill up and down from month to week to date. You cannot do that with PDI. I mean, it's really complicated to get information of the entire week of an entire month with those tools. And here you can just move around and have all the information available. You can see the performance signature of a system. You can see if how the system behaves normally. And if there's an anomaly, you can detect it really quickly. So this is a really great tool for that.
Yeah, it's a good point, Alex. And then, so besides month, week, and date, we keep track by time. So basically, you're going to drill down and you're going to see a 24-hour picture of any metric you're looking at, whether it's CPU or disk or memory or whatever. And of course, when you're there, you can zoom in and out. But if you're at the time level, you're saying, I don't want to look at 24 hours. I want to look at between 8 and 5, for example, right? So you could certainly zoom in and out on the 24-hour. But then you can scroll left to right, right? So you can just go backwards, as far. We keep that by that time. We call that the time level. We keep that for 2 years. So you can actually go as far back as 2 years and look at any given day for a 24-hour picture. Now, the last thing I'll mention before I hand it over to Alex to talk about a few other things you can do here is, remember I mentioned that historically it's only up to yesterday. However, when the phone rings, you need to be able to look at today's data, right? So we basically have a graphical interface over the collection services. So you can see where it says their CPU in current day, even though it says current by default, it would be today. But as you see here, by the default for collection services is 10 days. So if you were to use go perform option 2 and then F10, and then you have to scroll down, you would see what the standard data retention date is, and by default it's 10. So even though it says current, just like at the historical data, if you look at today, you can click a little green button that's in the lower right or left-hand corner to scroll, to the previous day or go forward if you're looking at previous days, right? Again, that go perform does require performance tools, and again, it's free. If you don't have it, you can download it. But you don't need it, you can use the config performance collection command and certainly configure the thing to save as many days as you like to. But there is probably 300 plus graphs in the current day, and again, mostly that's going to be done for problem determination.
Okay, thanks, Randy. And okay, here we have an example of the reports that you can generate with Performance Navigator. This is a fairly quick report that you can generate. It's for the jobs, and you can have all of the jobs that were running on a given day or on a given time. And it gets generated on a spreadsheet like report. So if we go to the next page, yeah, you will see that that's a spreadsheet that was, sorry, a report for the month. And you have all the summary of all the jobs that were on running on batch for that month. And this behaves actually like a spreadsheet. You can click on any of the columns, you can sort by any of the values, you can move the columns around so they are more visible to you. You can highlight them, and you can save these reports to a CSV file, and you can work with it on Excel, for instance. So it's a really great way for you to know what jobs are using the most of you, or are having problems with I/O, or are having problems with faulting or whatever. So we have another set of tools which are a bit more complex. It's the Power Analytics reporting. So it goes a bit beyond of just showing you the raw data of the jobs, or even the raw summarized data. These enterprise reports, sorry, these analytics reports, you can do a, I don't know, the enterprise performance overview for this, and you can get the the performance overview of the entire enterprise. And by enterprise, we mean all the frames on your company. So that will be the enterprise performance overview. And what's really cool about this, like Chuck said before, is that we have the guidelines, and you can see the systems that are above that guideline and they're not behaving as expected. And the really cool thing about this is that all of those numbers are clickable, so you can go ahead and click on any of them, and you will see the actual graphic that will show you how that LPAR was performing. And you see there that you have 4 frames, and inside of each frames you have the different LPARs. So that's why we call this the enterprise reports. You can have all of your frames here. So this is a really great report. And I think that now Randy is going to show us one of his favorite reports, right? Randy?
Yeah, exactly. This is, because we get engaged in professional services a lot, and oftentimes it's for medium to larger enterprises. The first thing is because we're coming in, I'm going to say blind. However, when they send us all this data, which is really easy to do, by the way, from Performance Navigator, it's a one file for each of the LPARs. This is the first place I go. It helps me understand what the entire enterprise looks like, right? So this would go through and say, okay, here's all the data that I have, right? And it tells me that what the serial number is and how many active cores it is and what the total number of LPARs there is. So if you like you look at frame number 2, you're right, you have the serial number, you got 1 core, you got 1 license, you got 3 LPARs. I have data from 2 LPARs. Well, one question is what's the third one, right? So it also tells you what you don't have, right? So it describes again what the whole frame is configured like, and then how each of the LPARs is configured and how much memory. So this is like if I was a end user customer, I would run this probably once a quarter anyway, because it's nice management report about all of the systems, how they're configured, what the resources are, and the versions of the operating systems and so forth. So it really covers all of the hardware at a nice, graphical or HTML format. There we go. So as we mentioned, you saw some of that HTML output. So you can certainly, you can technically save all of this HTML output to a shared drive. Emailing an HTML document is more difficult in most cases. And it's because most of the HTML, as Alex showed you, have hot links, and these hot links are to graphs. So if you were to email it, you'd be emailing a lot of stuff, like the HTML, the JPEGs, and everything else. So it's probably not the best way to do that. It's really the best method is to pick a shared drive or a web server somewhere, a mapped drive to your the PC that Performance Navigator is running on, and you're going to pick where you want to save, create any directory you want, and that's where you're going to save it. So we do have a framework, a dashboard over all of those HTML documents that Alex was kind of showing you at high level. So you could choose a daily health check, a weekly or a monthly or enterprise reports and so forth. And again, because they have a lot of hot links, you don't want to necessarily point your manager or whoever, your application team or whatever, to a directory like on the shared drive, because you're going to see a lot of stuff in the directory, right? So what you want to do is point them to this HTML overlay, which in this case you'll see, well, there was a frame, their frame number one. They click on that frame and they would see all of the LPARs on that frame. They click on that LPAR that we've redacted a little bit there, and you'd see all the reports that got generated. So it's an easy way for people that are not, technical or not running the tool to have access to all of that HTML output.
Well, with that, let's do a little bit of a live demo with Robot Monitor. We're just going to take a couple minutes. And first of all, you'll see that we've got multiple dashboards cycling through here. So for instance, this is my production dashboard. Here's a dashboard that contains 6 real-time graphs showing what's been happening over the last few hours. Another dashboard is going to pop in here. This is my storage dashboard showing 7 different partitions and where we're sitting. And you can see my Academy partition is getting a little high. Here's my 12-month view, and then it's cycling back to the production dashboard. So let's talk a little bit about how the GUI is architected and arranged. So first of all, the left-hand side is basically a menu system. The top shows the various dashboards that I have. I've got quite a few dashboards created, but I only have 3 of them in what's called my dashboard slideshow, and I can choose between any one of these just by clicking on it. If you want to do some more targeted analysis, you can click on a system or a group. So for instance, here we're looking at just a single system, and it's called Academy. All right, and I can see one bar here called CPU total that seems a little high, doesn't it? All right, so I can literally drill down on this, and you can see what I would call your normal performance profile for overall CPU utilization on this particular system. And you can see we had a little jump here. So all these are real-time data points that I'm highlighting as I scroll across the x-axis. And I can drill into any of these, as Alex mentioned. And I did get notified, by the way. I got notified that, hey, CPU has been high for a period of time. And sure enough, there's my highest CPU consuming jobs for this point in time. And with a right click, I could look at my worst response time, highest disk IO, or highest CPU due to SQL. And I can also drill down even at the job level, and I can see exactly what's going on. So this is kind of like doing a display job. All right, I can work with the call stack, library list. I could take actions on the job. If there was a message waiting, I could actually answer the message. I could drill into the job log. All right, and if this job, if you'd like to end this job, you certainly could. Let's go ahead and end it. And of course, it wants me to authenticate to make sure I have enough of what I call a permission, all right? And then at that point, I could even get at the spool files associated with the job, all right? So keep in mind, we're sampling this data every 30 seconds. So within the next few seconds, you'll see this bar drop down. But let's drill back into that. So this is what's been going on over the past few hours. If you're more interested in what Randy called your averaging, right? So here's, just to keep it simple, here's overall system CPU utilization over the past 12 months. Here's that infamous drop in CPU utilization. And, well, I know for a fact that we were granted more hardware resources back here in October. So you can see we had a big drop between October and November. Any of these months, for any of the metrics that I'm collecting, and I'm collecting literally hundreds of metrics across these systems, I can drill back into time. So now if I want to look at April, for instance, I could simply click on April, and it says, well, here's your daily averages for the month of April. All right, and you know what? It looks like this Tuesday the 30th was higher than average. Let's drill into that. Oh, look at this. Between the it looks like the 1 o'clock hour on April 30th was a little high. Let's drill into that. All right, so it looks like historically, for some reason during this about half-hour time period, we had a lot of CPU utilization. I can drill into that. All right, and we can see my counterpart in Argentina. Looks like she was running an abusive job on the system. All right, and so I can do that type of historical forensic analysis as well as doing the real-time threshold notification, which is really the role of Robot Monitor, is to be more so real-time. All right, so with that, let's go on to collection services. Alex.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. I'm gonna tell Amneris to behave. So,
Thank you.
yeah. But well, this is basically the collection services. They come with the OS. They are running always by default. They cycle the collector at midnight, and you can change the setup of these collection services, but the default is an interval of 15 minutes. We normally recommend 5 minutes because 15 minutes is too much if you're doing troubleshooting and problem determination or something. But yeah, that's what normally the default is. And by default, like Randy said, it's keeping 10 days of data. So you on your system, you have the performance collector for the last 10 days. We normally recommend to have more performance information, but that's a trade-off. That depends on how many disk space you have available. And that where Performance Navigator becomes really important, because Performance Navigator allows you to have more data online on your system using very little disk space, and that makes us able to do the analysis that we normally do. Now, the default library for the collection services is PFR data after B7 release 2, and it was QMG data before. We also have the host code for Performance Navigator, and you access it via the command there, go mpg live perfnav, and there you can see with the option 7 if you are current. The current release is 1905, and I think that we are gonna give you a little demonstration for this. So
Go for it, Alex.
let me share my screen as soon as I find out which one of this. Okay, I think this is the screen. Okay, perfect. So you're going to see that work Java, SBS, QSys work. So the jobs that are creating the performance data, they are always running. So these are the jobs on the OS, and you can modify the configuration of the performance collection using Go Perform. If you have the license product program, you enter option 2 and you enter option 2 again, and there you can see the default interval, which is 15 minutes. We normally ask it to be changed to 5, and then it cycles every 24 hours, and it keeps the retention period for the collectors are 120 hours, which is basically 5 days for this system. I don't know why it's keeping this few data, but the other, we were already seeing it, but the other way to use this is config PFR call, and you press F4 and you have all the same things. And if you press F10, you get to see the historical data, which if you allow it to be retrieved, it will be getting historical data, and it will be keeping it for 10 days. So this is the collectors, and the way that we have to access Performance Navigator, and the way that's set up, it's go with MPG Live, Perf Nav, and there with option 7, we can see how it's currently set up. I'm one version behind here on this system, and you can see that I have data from 2021 here. So I have almost 2.5 years of data. So that's really cool. And I think that I don't have a lot else to show, right?
All right. Well, I tell you what, I'll share my screen, and Alex, you can just keep talking about Robot Monitor. You can kind of shift gears a little bit
Oh, yeah.
and shift from Performance Navigator over to Robot Monitor.
Okay, cool. So one thing that Robot Monitor has that makes it really great is that it has lots of metrics that are by default on the system, and they are built in. And Robot Monitor collects information data on these metrics every 30 seconds. That's something that you can change on the host, but if you leave it by default on every 30 seconds, it will be fine. So as you can see, you have every metric that you can imagine there. And if there's a metric that you imagine and it's not there, you can always create it using the user supplied metrics that we have. But there are lots of metrics for the IBMI. And I think that, yeah, the most important thing is that you can customize them. I mean, you can customize not only the metrics that you're getting, but you can customize the thresholds for them. You can customize the jobs that you will be monitoring, or I don't know. You have there. You have the MQ, but we have metrics for mimics. We have metrics for other products. So that's really cool. And Chuck, yeah, sorry.
How do you create a monitor for something customized? So it's simply a matter of clicking on the big green button in the graphical interface and asking to monitor something new. And there's the button is located a couple of places. First of all, under data definition configuration, and also when you're viewing any individual system, there's a big green button that says monitor something new. It's simple as that. At that point, you are given a dialog that says, well, what do you want to monitor, all right? And you can filter this to determine, maybe you want to look at job performance or job status or something like that. And then you're given different monitoring types. In this case, I want to look at object size. How's that for monitoring? All right, maybe you want to look at journal receiver size, or you want to look at the size of a particular file, and you want to monitor that closely and maybe even set a threshold over it. So in this case, I want to look at the total size of my robot HA library, which is where my journal receivers are stored. All right, and I want to look at that on my Academy and Wisdom system because those are my my robot HA pair. Here's my collection frequency, so I'm going to collect this data every 30 seconds. If you're not interested in doing that, you can change the collection frequency. All right, simple as that. And actually, let's go live here. Alex, why don't you? We're getting a little bit tight on time, so why don't you just show how easy it is to set up a single monitor in Robot Monitor?
Okay, cool. So first of all, you need to log in to be able to see the thresholds and the data definitions. So that's a part of the security of the system. So nobody can change what you're monitoring or what you're doing. So basically, you saw I log in and I can see the data definitions there, and I can see the thresholds there. And we were talking about the really a quick monitor. So if we go to monitor something new, we're going to see this filter. Basically, if you choose native elements, you will be able to see all of the data definitions that we have for the IBMI, but let's say that I want to see only the ones that are related to job performances. And there I have the database CPU usage, and I can go to select my system. And here I can go to user work, and on job name, I can go and select QCTS init, and that's it. I have created my my metric. So once you do that, you can go to the monitor system, and sorry, you can go here and you can add the metric to your monitoring. So this has a 30 seconds delay. So as soon as it starts picking up the information, it will show up here. And I could have enter a threshold if I wanted to, but we are really running out of time. So Chuck,
Yeah,
I'm
we're
not
gonna
sure.
do quite a bit more on thresholds in the upcoming session. So
Hmm.
let's finish up here with monitoring the frame. Randy, you're on deck.
So as we mentioned more than once, it's also important to monitor the frame itself. So the way Performance Navigator would do that, there's a couple of ways. One is there's something called a virtual shared pool. So for those who may not be aware, you have, the smallest machine now has multiple cores. Whether they're active or not is a different question, but they all have multiple cores by default, right? And you can actually call it segmenting if you want. The purpose of virtual shared pools is basically to control software licensing, because a lot of software is licensed by core. And let's say you have an 8-core machine, but you only have a license for 2 cores of WebSphere, for example. You could create a virtual shared pool and say, I want these 2 LPARs, which currently use WebSphere, to only ever use 2 cores. So that's the way to do that. So therefore, you have to monitor it, right? So we can monitor utilization. You can look at it by busyness or look at it by cores, which is what most people are going to be doing. Right below that, you can also see the frame view, right? So you can say, show me what the whole frame looks like, right? So, let's say in that example, you have 8 cores and you have 2 shared pools. Do I need to, quote, activate or get another license for IBMI? And of course, as we all know, those can be expensive, right? So it matters about saying, do I need to go and ask for another license for IBMI or not, right? So that's why it's important. So this is like historical data. I think on the next graph, Chuck, is you can look at the management piece of this. And as Alex has said, one of the ways to do this is through these monthly and or enterprise reports. But you can also see that frame resource summary down at the bottom in frame performance overview, right, for last month. So, but the one thing that's important to note here, in order to do this, you need to be connected to as many or if not all of your LPARs in that frame. A lot of people think that, all I want to do is get a license for robot monitor and or performance. Now, for my production, I really don't need it for test dev. Well, all test dev, systems, quality dev test or, systems, they do take up resources, right? And it's particularly important when you're doing capacity planning, right? Because the next system's going to have some resources. So it's sort of important to do that. But for the systems you can connect it to, we can certainly give you a report of a frame view of the world. And as he said before, all that enterprise is that, think of that is if you have multiple frames, we can even show you a report about all of the frames in your enterprise. So it's, again, much more than just, monitoring your LPAR, it can go beyond that to help you monitor your frame or your enterprise.
Yeah, and so Randy, we're going to summarize that here in just a minute because we're going to talk about how Robot Monitor and Performance Navigator compare a little bit. So in terms of monitoring your frame, we're talking about expanding Robot Monitor, not just to do IBMI, but also to do the rest of the structure that is supporting your environment. So typically what that involves is VIOS. And VIOS, of course, is a flavor of AIX. So what you're looking at are all the built-in and customized monitors that are available for monitoring that environment that ultimately supports your critical IBMI infrastructure. So we've incorporated VIOS and AIX metrics. So this is live monitoring and then forensic reporting. Likewise, if you do run Linux on your Power server, as long as you have an IBMI involved someplace where you can collect and store the data to, we could also be monitoring your Linux environment. And there, we are seeing more and more Linux on Power as well. Then you can incorporate all that into one or multiple dashboards in the Robot Monitor graphical interface to get a quick view of immediately, what's happening, like your VIOS fiber channel performance. What does that look like right now? All right, I can view it, but I can also set thresholds over it. So if I don't have the dashboard up, you know what? We're still monitoring, we're still comparing what's collected and comparing it to a threshold and sending out notifications. So as much as I love the GUI and the flexibility and the customizable features of the graphical interface, if the graphical interface isn't up, we're still doing that monitoring and notification. So what we thought we'd do today is we would just sort of summarize the benefits of using Robot Monitor and Performance Navigator together, because ultimately they are in two separate categories in our robot wheel. Right? Robot Monitor is considered to be real-time. Performance Navigator is considered to be more of a forensic analysis tool. All right, so we've summarized our thoughts here. So in terms of Robot Monitor, when you think about Robot Monitor, you're thinking real-time monitoring and notification, live dashboards. Bring the dashboard up and it's continually refreshing every 30 seconds. Monitoring the frame using multi-partition views. If you've got 10 IBMI partitions and you want to know what's going on in terms of CPU and storage across those 10 partitions right now, multi-partition view in the dashboard. Highly configurable to your workloads. If you're just more focused on ODBC, JDBC workloads or batch or a combination thereof, that's the configurability of the product. Drill down, you saw me do that with that big bad job that was running on my system, monitoring the frame. We also have a PTF comparison feature that's unique to Robot Monitor that will allow you to compare the PTFs and PTF groups that are installed across all your partitions, whether they're IBMI, AIX, or Linux. It does use its own collection jobs. This is something that makes it a little different than Performance Navigator. We use our own collection jobs, and those jobs run in a subsystem dedicated to Robot Monitor. We've optimized those jobs over the years to be very efficient. And likewise, the data, when it gets stored in the DB2 database, we use variable length fields to compact the data on the way into the database so that when it's accessed by the GUI, it gets uncompacted and then presented in the GUI. So we do a really good job of how we store the data. Let's compare that to Performance Navigator. Randy, you want to take us through that?
Yeah, as you saw in some of the demos there, there is a lot of pre-configured and built-in graphs, right? Reports, power analytics, and as we mentioned, and we'll show you in day 2 and 3 about all of this as in Robot Monitor, a lot of this stuff can be automated as far as the production of these reports, right? So again, if you are looking at this to give management reporting versus you doing the tool for, prob determination or whatever. And as he mentioned, forensic analysis, we're using all that historical data. There is no real-time monitoring here, so we're at the 5-minute interval, so versus the 30-second interval, right? So that's as deep granular as it would get, but there is no alerting, so to speak, here, because again, we're more of a forensic after the fact type of thing, right? And as in Robot Monitor, we support all the operating systems so we can help you monitor the frame. And we do use collection services as the data. We do have a couple other jobs that collect library sizes and that kind of thing, but mostly 90% of the data comes from collection services. We are the only ones that have an exclusive what if. This gets into our capacity planning. And this is where we can do server consolidation and PEP2 and virtual shared pools and all kinds of disk and analysis and so forth, right? So this is where all that capacity planning functions happened, right? No, and if Performance Navigator is not set up in Robot Monitor, you can still look at the historical data, right? So it's we have a lot of customers who have both. I'm going to say the Robot Monitor, Chuck, jump in here, tend to be used more by the admin people, because it's a lot of technical stuff here. Whereas Performance Navigator tends to produce the reports for management. And then when there's a problem, they can sort of dive into it, but that's sort of a high level use why a lot of customers, like I said, do have both products.
Yep, and we'll do more comparison and between the products over the next couple of days. So as expected, we had a lot of information to share. So as we said, I hope you were putting your questions in the Q&A, and we'll certainly follow up with you after the fact. Keep in mind that Fortra has been doing IBMI for IBMI AS400, even going back to System 38 days for more than 40 years now. Of course, we also heavily participate in the cybersecurity world, not just on IBMI, but also outside of IBMI in a big way. And we'd be really interested in talking to you about that at any point. But ultimately, guys, thanks for a job well done. And thanks everybody for watching today. We appreciate the time you spent with us. And I hope everybody has a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.